Move it, old-timer. The only black belt around here is the one I'm wearing. Yours is a mop handle. Chase Donovan said it with a grin, then drove both hands into the old man's shoulders and sent him crashing into his own cart. The bucket flipped. Gray water exploded across the mats, soaking the old man's shirt, his pants, the side of his face. 50 phones were already filming. 50 people were already laughing. The old man pushed himself up on one knee, dripping. Chase circled him slowly, playing to the cameras. "Oh, look at him. 60-something and still scrubbing floors for guys like me." He crouched down, mock gentle. "Let me guess, this is the closest you ever got to a championship mat, huh? Wiping up after the real fighters." The laughter swelled. The old man reached for his rag. Chase kicked it just out of reach. "Stay down there. Down there's where you belong. Crawl for it, old man. Give the people a show." Then he shoved him a second time just for the views. And something happened nobody could explain. The old man's wrist turned the champion's arm folded backward into a lock so clean it looked rehearsed, and for half a second a 14-0 black belt hung frozen on his toes, helpless. Then the old man let go, bowed his head, picked up his bucket like nothing had happened. 14 wins, 100,000 followers. And not one of them knew the janitor they'd just shoved had buried more champions than they would ever beat. Before we go further, drop your city and your local time in the comments so I know where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe a person's worth isn't measured by their uniform or their skin, subscribe and stay with me, because this story is about to turn in a way nobody in that gym saw coming. At 4:45 in the morning, Charlotte was still a dark blue idea of itself, and Elijah Reed unlocked the side door of Titan Forge MMA. The way he had for 8 years, a soft click, a quiet nod to the empty room, as if greeting someone only he could see. He flipped on the lights one bank at a time. He never woke a building all at once. He filled his bucket and measured the soap with the patience of a man who had measured more important things in his life. Then he began to mop long, even arcs that never once crossed their own path, the wet shine following him across the floor like a tide pulled by something steady. Most people clean a floor. Elijah read one. Every scuff told him a story. The dragging heel near the cage meant someone was favoring a knee they hadn't told the coaches about. The smeared chalk by the pull-up bar meant a kid had stayed late trying to be better when no one was watching. The skid marks near the heavy bags meant a fighter had lost his footing, which meant he'd lost his patience, which meant he'd lose his next match if nobody fixed his base. Elijah fixed nothing out loud. He just knew. He knew this gym better than the men whose names were printed on the lease. He was 67, lean as braided cable, with close-cropped white hair and hands the color of old saddle leather. He moved slowly, but never once clumsily. Watch him long enough, and strange details rose to the surface like air in still water. He never stood with his weight settled on both heels. Always one foot a little loaded, a little ready. The way a man stands when standing still has cost him before. He folded his cleaning rags into perfect thirds corners, sharp as folded letters. And one morning when a 45-pound plate slid off a careless rack and dropped toward the floor, his hand was simply there, catching it an inch from the ground before his eyes seemed to have moved at all. A trainer setting up nearby blinked and laughed it off. "Quick hands, old man," he said. Elijah only nodded. "Lucky," he answered. But luck was a word he let other people keep for themselves. Home was a small brick house on the west side of the city paid off, and quiet the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Inside the shelves held the trophies of an invisible life, not gold cups, not engraved plates, but absences. Spaces dusted around, never filled. On the mantel lay a photograph face down. He cleaned around it every week and never once turned it over. In the bedroom closet sat an old military footlocker. Steel cornered a brass padlock holding the lid shut. The key hung on a thin chain around his neck under his shirt, against the skin over his heart. He had worn it there for 14 years. In 14 years, he had not opened the lock once. Some nights he carried the footlocker to the edge of his bed and set it across his knees. He never turned the key. He just sat in the dark and listened to the house breathe around him, the refrigerator humming, the pipes ticking, the absence settling in the rooms like a second tenant who never paid and never left. The neighbors knew him as the polite, older gentleman who waved from his porch and kept his lawn cut sharp. The men at Titan Forge knew him as the janitor, if they knew him at all. To most of them, he was furniture that moved itself a gray shape behind a mop, a man you stepped around without seeing. His paycheck cleared every 2 weeks. $11.40 an hour after 8 years, and not one raise he'd ever asked for. He bought day-old bread from the discount rack, and good coffee, because coffee was the one luxury he refused to apologize for. He paid a phone bill that no one understood for a line nobody ever called. He had a routine, and the routine was a kind of mercy. Wake before the sun. Open the gym. Read the floor. Go home. Sit with the locker. Sleep or pretend to. He asked for nothing. He explained nothing. He let the world believe he was exactly what he appeared to be because the truth was heavier than any bucket he carried, and he had decided a long time ago that the truth could stay locked where it couldn't hurt anybody else. But a man can fold himself small for only so long before the world tests the seams. And the world was about to send a 24-year-old with 14 wins and 100,000 strangers cheering his name to do exactly that. Elijah finished the floor that morning the way he finished it every morning, checking the corners, the places nobody inspected, because the corners were where you learned whether a man cleaned for the boss or cleaned for himself. He wrung the mop, set it to dry, and stood for a moment in the silence of the empty gym palms open at his sides. For half a breath, his hands remembered something. They opened, turned, settled a shape from another life, a grip his body had performed 10,000 times, and his mind had spent 14 years trying to forget. Then he closed them, picked up his bucket, walked into the dark hallway, humming something low and old, a tune his wife used to sing while she cooked. What kind of man hides hands like that behind a mop for 8 years, and what was locked inside that steel box heavy enough to bury a life and waiting after 14 silent years for the one push that would finally turn the key Chase Donovan trained at Titan Forge like the place owed him rent. 24 years old, a legitimate black belt, 14 straight wins, and a highlight reel. He watched more often than he watched film of his opponents. The talent was real, that was the problem. His takedowns were explosive. His top control was crushing. When he drilled, the whole gym slowed down to watch, and Chase knew it, and Chase loved it. Talent without humility is gasoline without a tank, all that power, nothing to hold it. 100,000 followers replayed his finishes and called him the future of the sport. Chase agreed with them loudly and often. Sponsors slid into his messages. A supplement company sent him free tubs he posted with one hand, and a smirk. Members orbited him like he generated his own gravity, and in a way he did the gravity of money, because behind Chase stood his father. Richard Donovan was a construction magnate, whose company had poured the foundations of half the new towers rising over uptown Charlotte. He had written the single largest sponsorship check Titan Forge had ever cashed, a number, with enough zeros that the gym's logo now shared a banner with Donovan Builds. Richard didn't train. Richard didn't need to. He bought his son a kingdom and expected the kingdom to bow. The man who bowed lowest was Greg Halloran, the gym's manager. Greg had 2 unwritten rules: keep the equipment clean and keep the Donovans happy. Whenever Chase's jokes curdled into cruelty, Greg discovered something fascinating on his clipboard and studied it until the laughter died down. He wasn't an evil man, people said. He was just a man whose spine bent in the direction of the rent. There's a particular kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's a manager looking away, and Greg had perfected it. Nicole Hayes worked the front desk, and Nicole saw everything the cameras saw, plus the things cameras miss. She liked Elijah. He remembered her birthday when no one else did. He left the break room cleaner than he found it. He once changed her flat tire in the parking lot in the rain and waved off her thanks like she'd offered him a debt he didn't want. Nicole had started to notice that the man everyone treated like background was the only person in the building who treated her like foreground. One Tuesday evening, the gym half empty, she watched a 10-year-old boy named Deshaun punching the air in the corner, all elbows, all frustration. His mother worked a double at the hospital, and his ride was late, so the boy had stayed throwing the same combination over and over, getting it wrong every time. His feet were crossed. His chin floated high in the air, an open invitation. His balance leaked out of him with every punch. The kid's coach had gone home. Nobody was watching. Nobody but the janitor. Elijah came through with his cart and slowed. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the boy throw the combination twice the way a doctor watches a limp before he names the break. Then he set his mop against the wall. "You're falling forward," he said quietly. "Your power's running out the front door before it gets to your fist." Deshaun turned half defensive, expecting to be told to leave. "Coach already went home." "I know." Elijah crouched to the boy's level knees, popping. With 2 fingers, he tapped the back of the boy's lead foot. "Bring this in. 2 inches." He turned the boy's hips a fraction. "Now your hips throw the punch, not your shoulder." He laid 1 finger under the boy's chin and pressed it gently down. "And hide this. Your chin's been writing checks your hands can't cover." Deshaun frowned, reset, and threw the punch. It snapped. The sound of it, clean, sharp, a whip cracking in an empty room, startled the boy so badly he stepped back and stared at his own fist like it belonged to someone else. He threw it again. It snapped again. Something in his face changed the way a light comes on in a window at dusk. "How'd you do that?" the boy breathed. "I've been trying for weeks." Elijah stood knees popping a second time. "You did it! I just got out of your way." He picked up his mop. "Hands down between rounds. You're not on a poster. Save the smile for when you've earned it." He pushed his cart toward the dark hallway, humming that same low tune, and Deshaun stood in the corner throwing the same punch, over and over, faster, cleaner, grinning at nothing. At the front desk, Nicole had frozen with the phone ringing in her hand, forgotten. She had taught aerobics in another life. She knew what coaching looked like, real coaching, the kind that takes a decade to learn and 2 seconds to deliver. She had just watched a man fix a child's entire structure with 2 fingers and 3 sentences and walk away like he'd done nothing at all. She set the phone down without answering it. She watched the gray shape disappear down the hallway, and for the first time in 2 years of saying good morning to him, Nicole Hayes really looked at the janitor. Who taught a man to build a fighter with 2 fingers? Where does a person learn to do, in 3 seconds, what coaches charge a fortune and a lifetime to teach? And how long can a secret like that stay buried under a gray uniform before someone with 100,000 followers and nothing better to do decides the quiet old man at the back of the room would make a perfect joke? Saturday came in loud. Chase Donovan had just taken his 15th straight win, a second-round submission across town, and he came back to Titan Forge with the belt over his shoulder and an audience already assembled. 50 members crowded the mats. Phones came out before his jacket came off. He replayed the finish on the gym's big screen, twice narrating his own genius, and then the way bored champions always do. He went looking for entertainment. Entertainment was pushing a mop along the far wall. Hey, everybody, quiet down!" Chase grinned at his followers and crossed the floor with the loose swagger of a man who has never once been told no. "Move it, old-timer. The only black belt around here is the one I'm wearing. Yours is a mop handle." A few people laughed, uncertain. Elijah kept mopping eyes down arcs, even. That wasn't enough for the cameras. Chase drove both hands into the old man's shoulders and sent him crashing into his own cart. The bucket flipped. Gray water exploded across the mats, soaking Elijah's shirt, his pants the side of his face. The gym detonated with laughter. "Pick it up," Chase sneered, tearing the folded rag from the cart and flinging it at the old man's chest. "Your people clean. My people compete. Know the difference." Elijah pushed himself up onto one knee, dripping slow the way a man rises when pride is the heaviest thing he's lifting that day. He reached for the rag. Chase kicked it just out of reach and crouched down mock tender, playing the crowd. "Stay down there. That's where you belong. Closest you'll ever get to a real mat." His voice dropped into something uglier. "Crawl for it, old man. Give the people a show." And then, because the laughter was peaking and the algorithm rewards a man who never knows when to stop, Chase shoved him one more time, both hands square in the chest, just for the views. What happened next took less than a second, and 400 slow-motion replays would never fully agree on it. Elijah's hand came up. Not in anger, his face didn't change. It was reflex 14 years buried, and still faster than thought. His fingers found Chase's wrist, rolled it, and the champion's own driving weight did the rest. The arm folded backward into a lock, so clean, so structurally perfect, that the whole room understood it was perfect before it understood what it was looking at. For half a second, a 14-0 black belt hung helpless on the balls of his feet. His shoulder, 1 ounce of pressure from the floor, his face caught somewhere between confusion and pain. The gym went silent. Phones kept rolling. Then Elijah let go. He didn't drive it home. He didn't make Chase tap. He released the wrist, steadied the younger man by the elbow so he wouldn't stumble, and lowered his eyes. "My apologies, son," he said quietly. "Old reflex, slippery floor. You want to be careful." He picked up his bucket. He set the wet floor sign upright. And he began mopping the same spot again, long, even arcs, while 50 phones filmed his soaked gray back. The silence held for 1 heartbeat too long, the silence of a script that has just gone off the rails, and then Chase laughed too loud to cover it. "Lucky grab," he announced. "Old man got lucky. You all saw he sucker grabbed me." But the laughter that came back wasn't with him anymore. It had turned just slightly, and turned in a direction Chase couldn't control. Half the room was laughing at the janitor, the other half, the half that knew grappling, was staring at the old man's back with something that wasn't a joke at all. Only one person in the room wasn't laughing at all. Deshaun stood by the cubby's gym bag on his shoulder, watching the man who had fixed his stance get treated like garbage on the floor he kept clean for them. The boy's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Elijah caught his eyes for half a second, and then looked away, because some things hurt worse than a wet shirt, and a child's disappointment in the world is one of them. By 8 o'clock that night, the clip was everywhere. Chase posted it himself, cropped to make himself the hero captioned. Janitor tried it. #humbled. 200,000 views before midnight. Strangers stitched it, slowed it, mocked the old man's fall. But underneath, a different conversation had started, small and stubborn. A Jujitsu account reposted the half-second of the lock and wrote, "Forget the fall watch the old guy's hands." That's a textbook wrist lock off pure reflex. Who is this janitor? It had 400 likes by morning and climbing. In the comments under Chase's video, exactly 6 people asked if the old man was okay. Across the city, in a small brick house, Elijah Reed sat on the edge of his bed. His wet uniform hung over the shower rod, dripping into the tub, a slow, patient rhythm in the dark. He held his right hand up in the lamplight and looked at it the way you look at an old friend you'd promised yourself you'd never call again. It had moved on its own. After 14 years of keeping it folded, it had remembered everything in half a second. He reached up and lifted the steel footlocker onto his knees. For 14 years, the key had hung warm against his chest and cold to its only purpose. His thumb found the brass padlock and traced it twice. His heart was loud in the quiet house. Then, for the first time since the day he stopped being who he used to be, Elijah Reed lifted the key from around his neck and fit it to the lock. What had a single shove from a laughing boy just unlocked, and what was waiting inside that box after 14 years to come back into the light? The lock opened with a click that sounded enormous in the empty house. Elijah lifted the lid slowly, the way you lift a sheet from a face you're not ready to see. Inside lay 3 things arranged the way grief arranges things carefully so they can't be disturbed by accident. The first was a belt. Red and black, worn soft and gray along its length. The bar of a coral belt that takes a man 30 years and 10,000 classes to earn. The kind of belt you do not buy. The kind almost nobody alive holds. Stitched at one end, small white thread gone yellow, Professor E. Reed. The second was a photograph. 4 people under a banner that read State Championships. 3 young fighters and a younger Elijah, grinning so hard it hurt to look at. And next to the younger Elijah, his arm slung around the boy, was a face that had his eyes a tall, laughing young man, 20 years old, holding a trophy like it was a newborn. The third was a phone. An old flip phone, years out of date. Its screen scratched, kept charged by a habit Elijah had never once explained to anyone. He paid $11 a month to keep a deadline alive. He looked at all 3 for a long time. He touched none of them. At 2 in the morning, he closed the lid, locked it, and hung the key back around his neck. Some doors you only open an inch. Chase Donovan woke up famous, not fight famous. Internet famous, which is louder and hungrier and 1,000 times stupider. The clip crossed 500,000 views by Sunday afternoon, but so did the other one, the half-second of the wrist lock replayed by grapplers who weren't laughing. And that was the splinter Chase couldn't get out of his skin. His own followers were tagging him under it. Bro got reflex locked by the janitor. The champion had been made small by the smallest man in the room, and the camera had caught it forever. So Chase did what wounded pride always does. He went looking for someone to make smaller. Monday. Elijah found his supply cart locked inside the sauna, the metal handles hot enough to blister. Chase filmed himself discovering it. Tuesday. Somebody emptied a $40 tub of protein powder across the lobby. Elijah had just finished a white cloud settling over the floor, and Chase filmed the old man kneeling in it to clean. Wednesday brought a new game. Chase blocked the hallway and wouldn't move until the old man bowed. "Bow to the champ, old timer. House rule." His friends crowded behind their phones. Elijah bowed small, slow eyes down and stepped past. The camera loved it. The caption wrote itself, "Respect the King." Every clip ended the same way, Chase's laughing face, and a hashtag about respect used by a man who'd never offered any. The algorithm taught Chase the oldest lesson it knows. His submissions took 8 weeks of training camp. The janitor clips took 8 seconds. And the janitor clips did better. Cruelty performs. Cruelty always performs. So when his manager asked what was next, Chase didn't say a title defense. He said, "Give the people a real fight. Me and the mop man. Let's see his lucky reflexes when I'm actually trying." Greg Halloran heard about it and discovered something fascinating on his clipboard. Nicole Hayes heard about it too and Nicole stopped looking away. She'd taken it to Greg twice. Twice he'd told her boys blow off steam that Elijah hadn't complained, which was true. Elijah never complained, but Nicole had started doing something quiet every night. Before the security system overwrote itself on its 72-hour loop, she plugged in a small silver hard drive she kept in her glove box and copied the day's footage. All of it. The sauna, the protein powder, the hallway beau. She didn't know yet why she was doing it. She just knew the way you know weather is coming, that somebody someday was going to need the truth, and the truth in this building had a way of getting deleted. She labeled the drive in marker in her own small handwriting for Elijah. Thursday night, the numbers dipped. The internet was getting bored. Chase could feel it like a falling thermometer. Pranks were appetizers, and the crowd wanted a main course. So he stopped teasing and made it official. He stood in the center of the gym, killed the music, climbed onto a folding chair with his phone held high, and addressed his 100,000 strangers. All right, the people have spoken. Mop Man thinks his hands are fast. He found Elijah across the room, mopping, not looking up. I'm calling it out. 1 round. Me and the janitor right here on this mat. Let's find out if that lucky grab was skill or an accident. He grinned. I'll even let him keep his uniform on. Polls going up. Should the old man fight the champ? He posted it before he stepped off the chair. The answers came in like a tide. By midnight, 89% had voted yes. Tens of thousands of strangers who had never met Elijah Reed, who didn't know his name, who thought he was a punchline in a gray shirt, had decided he should be put on a mat and broken on camera for their entertainment. The number climbed while he slept, while the city slept, while a steel footlocker sat in a dark closet holding a red and black belt that none of those 89% could have imagined existed. Elijah saw the poll the next morning the way you see a storm you can't outrun. He didn't answer it. A man with no followers can't argue with 89%. But that night alone in his kitchen, he took the old flip phone from his pocket, and his thumb found one saved voicemail he had paid $11 a month for 14 years to keep alive. Whose voice had Elijah Reed been protecting all this time, and why did the date chase? The voicemail was 23 seconds long. Elijah knew its shape in the dark, the way you know a stair you've climbed 10,000 times. He pressed play. Hey, Pop, it's me. We're gassing up outside Gastonia. Be at the venue by 6. You should see the bracket they put me top seed. Top seed, Pop, you believe that? A laugh, bright and young and careless with all the time it thought it had. Coach Reed and Champ Reed on the same trophy. That's gonna look crazy. Love you. Save me a seat up front. I'm bringing it home. A pause. Then smaller, almost shy. Couldn't have done none of this without you. See you soon. The message ended. The kitchen was very quiet. Elijah did not cry. He had done his crying years ago in rooms this city never saw, until there was nothing left to spend. He pressed save the way he always pressed save, and set the phone face down on the table, and sat with his coffee going cold, and his son's voice fading out of the air. Isaiah Reed, 20 years old, top seed. He never made it past Gastonia. The state troopers had come to the door with their hats in their hands. A truck had crossed a median on a wet stretch of I-85, the kind of accident that takes 10 seconds and the rest of your life. Isaiah had been driving to the championship his father had spent a decade preparing him for. Coach Reed and Champ Reed on the same trophy. Della had collapsed in the doorway. She followed their boy 18 months later. The doctors called it her heart. And they were right, just not in the way they meant. Elijah had buried his son on a Friday, his wife on a Sunday, a year and a half later. And somewhere in between, he had locked his belt in a steel box and walked off the mat for good. He didn't quit because the fighting frightened him. He quit because he could not forgive himself for the one tournament he hadn't driven his boy to himself. 14 years of mopping floors in silence, penance no one had assigned him served alone. Friday the gym was packed. Chase had been counting down to it all week, and now he made a production of it, Killed. The music dragged a chair to the center of the mats, climbed up with the lights of 40 phones finding him like he was a stage. Everybody gather up, special event. He hopped down and crossed to the far wall, where Elijah stood beside his cart, the gray water in the bucket gone perfectly still. Old-timer, time to back up those lucky hands. 1 round, you and me, right here tomorrow noon. I don't fight, son, Elijah said. I clean floors. Course you do. Floors don't fight back, do they? The crowd laughed. Chase peeled bills off a money clip and slapped them onto the edge of the mat. $1,000 says you can't last 60 seconds with me. Cash, right there. Or, he grinned at the cameras, you kneel down right now and shine my belt in front of everybody. Your choice, old man. Keep your money, Elijah said. Buy yourself a softer mattress. A mattress? Why would I need a softer mattress? Because everyone meets the mat eventually, son. Elijah's voice didn't rise. Some just haven't fallen yet. The gym went strange and quiet the way a room goes when a script stops being followed and nobody knows the next line. Chase blinked, then laughed louder to bury it. Noon tomorrow, Mop Man versus the champ, be here. The crowd roared back to life, and the moment was content again, safe, shareable his. Greg Halloran appeared at the edge of the mats, looked at the $1,000 lying there, and walked quietly back into his office without a word. Nicole watched Elijah push his cart toward the supply room. His hands were steady. His arcs stayed even. Only his jaw had changed, set, like a door easing shut. In the supply room among the bleach and the spare mats, Elijah sat on an upturned crate and took out the other phone, the new one, the cheap one with a calendar. He opened it to check the date of the fight Chase had announced. Tomorrow. The little gray numbers stared back at him, and the breath went out of him slowly, like a man set down after carrying too much for too long. The date was the 14th, 14 years to the day, since the troopers came to his door with their hats in their hands. 14 years since a silver sedan never made it past Gastonia. Of every day on the calendar of every Saturday, Chase Donovan could have picked for his circus. He had picked the anniversary of Isaiah Reed's death, and he didn't even know it. He couldn't have known it. To him, it was just a good day for views. Elijah sat for a long time, in the smell of bleach and old canvas, the phone glowing in his hand, his son's voice still somewhere behind his eyes. 60 seconds, the boy had said. 60 seconds on the 14th. He closed the calendar. He stared at the cinder block wall, and the wall stared back, and outside the door the gym laughed on oblivious, 100,000 strangers already setting their alarms for noon. What does a man do when the world demands a show on the worst day of his life? Kneel and call it peace, or step onto the one mat he swore he'd never touch again, on the very anniversary that broke him Saturday, came up gray and soft. Before the sun cleared the trees, Elijah Reed stood in Evergreen Cemetery with 2 folding chairs and 1 paper cup of coffee. He set a chair by each stone. Della Reed, beloved wife. Isaiah Reed, 20, forever. He sat down between them the way a man sits at a kitchen table with the people he loves, and he drank half the coffee and poured the rest into the grass for the boy, the way he used to share the last sip on tournament mornings. They want me on the mat today, baby, he told Della Stone. On his day! Can you believe that? The wind moved the dogwoods overhead. He turned to Isaiah's stone and sat a long while in the kind of silence that isn't empty. I'm not gonna hurt that boy, he said finally. I'm just gonna let him meet himself. He pressed his palm flat to the cold granite. Wish me steady hands, son. I'm a little out of practice at being who I am. Back in the truck, he made one phone call, a number he hadn't dialed in 6 years. It rang twice. Andre, it's Coach. A silence, then a breath like a big man sitting down hard. Professor Reed. My God. Coach where? Titan Forge, MMA, off try-on, noon today. I need a witness. A witness to what? 60 seconds, Elijah said, and hung up before the boy could ask anything he didn't want to answer. At home, he took down a canvas bag stiff with disuse and unzipped it. Inside was his old GI white Gone cream with age, the cotton soft as a Sunday shirt. He folded it into the bag with hands that knew the motion. Then he stood at the closet and looked at the steel footlocker for a long moment. He left the red and black belt where it lay. He would not wear 30 years of rank against a confused child. He'd go bare-waisted, an old man in plain cloth. Defense only. He told the empty house the promise landing in the quiet like a stone in a well. Not one strike. You hear me, Isaiah? Your father doesn't hit children. Not even this one. By 11:30, the parking lot of Titan Forge was already full, and the internet was waiting for a beating. It was going to get a lesson instead. Noon arrived like a held breath. 300 people pressed around the main mat, and thousands more floated in Chase's live stream, the viewer counter ticking upward in the corner of his screen. Somebody had printed a banner, the Janitor Challenge. Chase bounced in his corner in a fresh team jacket, rolling his neck, mugging for the cameras. The $1,000 sat folded under a water bottle at the mat's edge. Greg Halloran stood where managers stand when they want to be seen and not blamed. At 12:08, the crowd parted, laughing phones high. Elijah Reed walked through in a cream-colored G-no belt, feet bare. The laughter stuttered. Something about the way he moved confused the room. There was no shuffle now. No old man's care. Each step landed quiet and exact, his weight pouring from foot to foot, like water finding its own level. And the men in the crowd who actually knew grappling felt the temperature in their chests drop a single degree. In the back row, a broad-shouldered man in a gray hoodie lowered his coffee and went very, very still. Andre Coleman had driven 90 minutes without finishing a sentence. He had not seen that walk in 14 years, and his whole body recognized it before his mind did. "Nice pajamas, old-timer," Chase called arms wide for his audience. Lost and found, they were a gift, Elijah said. 60 seconds. Try to survive. 60 seconds, Elijah agreed. Try to listen. Listen to what? Your own breathing son. It's about to get real loud. Greg stepped forward, raised an awkward hand to play referee, and dropped it. Someone started a phone timer. The room counted down. 3, 2, 1. Chase came out fast, a feint. Then his trademark blast, double-leg the takedown that had folded 14 men. He shot for the old man's hips. He hit nothing. Elijah wasn't where the shot arrived. He'd dropped his level a quarter second early, sprawled his weight onto Chase's back like a wet coat, and let the champion's own momentum carry him face first into empty mat. The crowd heard it before they understood it. The slap of bare feet, the whump of a missed takedown. The surprised grunt of a man who had never in his career simply missed. Chase scrambled up red-faced and swung into a flurry, a jab, a cross, a hook to the body that should have cracked ribs. Each one found the place an old man's torso had been a half-second before. Elijah never blocked. Blocking is for people who arrive late. He turned, slipped, breathed, and the punches whistled through the warm air where he used to be. Then Chase overcommitted on the hook, and Elijah's hand found the wrist, the same reflex from the viral clip, except this time he didn't let go. He stepped under, rolled the arm, and the whole gym watched the champion's elbow lock straight, his shoulder pinned to the ceiling of its own range, his body bending to obey a pressure he couldn't argue with. Chase's mouth fell open. He went up on his toes, helpless, exactly the way he'd been in the 8-second clip, only now 300 people and thousands of strangers were watching it happen in real time. And it was lasting longer, and the old man's face was calm as still water. 20 seconds in, nobody in the building was laughing. In the back row, Andre Coleman set down his coffee with a hand that wasn't quite steady and whispered to no one at all. There he is. Who had Chase Donovan really challenged to a fight on a live stream in front of the world? And how far would the old man let it go before he gave the champion the lesson he'd been begging for? Elijah eased the wrist lock off the way you set down something fragile. He didn't break it. He gave the arm back, steadied Chase by the elbow, and stepped away with his palms open. "Breathe, son," he said quietly. "You're all right. The mat's not your enemy." Chase slapped the hand away and came up wild. The champion had stopped fighting and started flailing, 24 years old, 15 wins, 100,000 strangers watching, and every ounce of it leaking out of him onto a mat he couldn't land a hand on. He swung harder, which made him slower, which made the air he hit feel heavier. In the live stream chat, the jokes were dying mid-sentence. "Is this real?" someone typed. "The janitor is a ghost," typed another. The counter rolled past 90,000. Chase heard none of it. All he heard was his own lungs, exactly as the old man had promised, and the soft, patient slide of 2 bare feet that would not stay still. At 40 seconds, something in Chase broke loose behind his eyes. He lunged off the mat, snatched a steel water bottle from the edge heavy full, and swung it at the old man's skull with everything he had left. The crowd screamed. Phones jerked. A mother near the front pulled her child's face into her side. What happened next would be slowed down 9 million times. Elijah didn't flinch. He swayed inside the arc, just enough the bottle hissing past his ear, and his hand found the swinging wrist. He stepped under, turned his hip, and the champion's arm snapped backward into a jiu-jitsu lock, so complete that the whole gym felt it in their own joints. Elbow hyperextended, shoulder pinned to the absolute ceiling of its range, the bottle clattering loose across the floor. Chase rose onto his toes, then to the edge of his balance, his face white, a strangled sound coming out of him. 1 degree more of pressure, and the arm would have folded the wrong way for good. The old man held him exactly there. 1 degree short of ruin. And then 300 people watching, thousands more behind glass. Elijah Reed did the thing none of them would ever forget. He let the pressure off. He cupped the back of Chase's neck with his free hand, guided the staggering boy down, and laid him onto the soft vinyl like something worth saving. No slam, no spike. No, he said, a man who had just tried to brain him onto the floor as gently as you'd lay down a sleeping child. The phone timer sang. 60 seconds finished. Elijah Reed had not thrown a single strike. He stood over the gasping champion, breathing the way men breathe in libraries, and he bowed low, formal, both hands at his sides to the boy at his feet. Then he straightened, walked to the edge of the mat, left the $1,000 untouched under the water bottle, picked up his canvas bag, and walked toward his locker room through a silence you could have framed and hung on a wall. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody dared to breathe. Then by the cubbies, Deshaun began to clap. Alone at first, a single 10-year-old's hands cracking in the quiet. Then the kids' class joined. Then their parents. Then the room, a rolling thunder of 300 people, a sound Chase Donovan would hear in his sleep for a long time. He stayed on his back, staring up at the lights. And somewhere under the humiliation lived a feeling he had no name for. It felt terribly, almost like awe. He buried it fast and reached for anger instead. Anger was familiar. Anger had a father. In the back row, Andre Coleman didn't clap. He just watched the cream-colored back disappear down the hallway and said to no one, "He's still perfect." By 6 that evening, the internet had a new obsession. The full live stream, the slow-motion breakdowns, the freeze frame of an old hand cradling the neck of the boy who'd swung steel at it. Martial arts channels dissected the footwork frame by frame and came back with the same stunned verdict: this is not luck. This is mastery you cannot buy. The clip crossed 5 million views before midnight under one question repeated in 40 languages. Who is the janitor? 40 floors above uptown Charlotte. Richard Donovan watched his son get laid out on a mat in front of the whole world. He watched it twice. He did not call Chase. He did not ask if the boy was hurt. He scrolled to a name his money kept on speed dial, a name that had buried lawsuits, rivals, and inconvenient stories alike. Catherine Voss answered on the first ring. "Counselor," Richard said quietly, "I need you to bury a janitor." Voss didn't take cases. She took territory. By Monday morning, she'd watched the footage without expression, the way surgeons look at x-rays, and slid a folder across Richard's glass desk. Inside was the architecture of a lie, a real enough medical report listing Chase's sprained elbow and bruised shoulder, a sworn statement in which Chase suddenly remembered being threatened by an aggressive older man, and a strategy built on one fact about the internet: nobody watches the whole video. The new clip dropped Wednesday. 90 seconds expertly cut. Gone was the shove, the insult, the $1,000 bet, the swinging bottle. What remained was an old man in a strange gi wrenching a young athlete's arm 3 times, while children watched from the front row. The caption wrote itself, "Hidden Fighter Assaults, Local Champion at Family Gym." By Thursday, the local news ran it. Local. 68-year-old janitor with mysterious combat training injures young athlete. The anchors used the word disturbing twice. The 5 million views of the truth vanished under 30 million views of the lie. And a man with no social media at all cannot answer 30 million views. How does a man who spent 14 years making himself invisible defend himself when the whole country has already decided he's a monster, and the only people who know the truth haven't found him yet? Elijah didn't try to answer it. He went to work at 4:45 the next morning and found his key no longer fit the side door. Greg Halloran met him in the parking lot with an envelope and a speech he'd practiced badly. "Liability thing, Elijah. Nothing personal. The board, the insurance, you understand." He couldn't look up from the asphalt. "And the Donovans are talking to their lawyer about your pension. Some paperwork issue. But it could all go away." His voice dropped. "They want a public apology. On camera. You say you provoked the boy. You say you're sorry. Mr. Donovan makes the lawsuit disappear. You keep your retirement." For a long moment, the only sound was a flag rope ticking against its pole. "I mopped that floor 8 years, Elijah said. "Never missed a corner." He held the unopened envelope back out. "You tell Mr. Donovan my knees don't bend that direction." He drove home and laid the summons on his kitchen table. Donovan versus Reed. Damages sought $900,000. The math was simple and merciless. Even winning would bankrupt him. Lawyers cost more than janitors earn. That night, the old doubt came back wearing new clothes. 14 years ago, the mats had taken his son. Now he'd stepped onto one for 60 seconds, and it was taking the rest: his house, his name, his quiet. Maybe the lesson just repeated until you learned it: everything he loved, the fighting life eventually collected. He was sitting there with cold coffee and the summons at 10 at night when headlights swept the window. Then a second pair. Then a third. Car doors closed in the driveway. 1, 2, 3. Unhurried. The knock, when it came, was soft, almost respectful. He opened the door, and 14 years stood on his porch. Andre Coleman's shoulders filling the frame. Beside him, a woman with the straight back of 2 decades of judo Keisha Bell Olympic bronze. And a man in a tailored coat with a gym chain logo on his cap, Marcus Lowry, undefeated owner of 11 gyms across 3 states. Nobody spoke. Then Keisha stepped forward and hugged the old man so hard the porch light shook. "You stopped answering letters, Professor," she said into his shoulder. "So we stopped writing. We came instead." They sat in his kitchen until 2 in the morning. Andre had flown in for the challenge and stayed for the lawsuit. He'd called the others the night the doctored video dropped. Elijah tried twice to send them home. "This is my mess," and Marcus set his coffee down and said, "Coach, you taught us the first rule of the corner. Nobody fights alone." For once, the old man ran out of arguments. The hearing was small, but the story was not, so the hallway outside filled with cameras. Judge Raymond Ellison, a careful man with reading glasses and no patience for theater, called the room to order. Richard Donovan sat behind his lawyer like a man who'd already read the ending. Chase sat beside him, arm in a sling, eyes down. Elijah came alone in his church suit, hands folded, representing himself because he could afford nothing else. Catherine Voss worked the room like a scalpel. She played the 90-second cut. She said concealed combat training 4 times. "Mr. Reed, what rank do you hold? Rank fades when you stop wearing it, ma'am." "Answer the question." "Coral belt. 3 disciplines." The room murmured. Voss turned to the bench. "A man with that training is a weapon, Your Honor. A weapon that worked beside children for 8 years without disclosing what it was. Why does a martial arts master spend 8 years pushing a mop, Mr. Reed? What were you hiding from?" For the first time, the old man's hands tightened on the table. The room leaned in. Elijah opened his mouth and closed it. "Some doors don't open in public." Voss smiled at the silence and let it work. "No further questions." And that was when the doors at the back of the courtroom actually opened. Andre Coleman walked up the aisle in a state athletics jacket, and half the room recognized him before he reached the rail. He asked to be heard, and Judge Ellison, curiosity beating procedure, allowed it. Andre took the oath and looked straight at the press. "My name is Andre Coleman. The man you've been calling a hidden threat is Professor Elijah Reed. We called him the Quiet Hand. He took me off a corner at 14 and made me a national champion. He trained Keisha Bell and Marcus Lowry, too." He paused. "Stand up." 2 people rose in the gallery. The murmur became a roar Ellison had to gavel down. "You asked what he was hiding from," Andre said, his voice dropping. "I'll answer it because he never will. 14 years ago, Coach had a 4th student, the best of us, his son Isaiah." Elijah went very still. Isaiah was 20. He died in a crash on I-85 driving to the championship his father spent 10 years building him for. Coach buried his boy. He locked his belt in a box. He never coached again. Andre's voice cracked. "He didn't quit because he was dangerous. He quit because he couldn't forgive himself. There's a difference." At the table, Elijah looked down at his open hands. Nobody had ever seen the old man cry, and they didn't now. But his shoulders dropped finally like a man setting down something he'd carried up a very long hill. Then the second door opened, and Nicole Hayes came up the aisle, holding a silver hard drive like it was made of glass. Under oath, she told the court about the security footage and the copies she'd made. Ellison ordered the full Sunday, played the insult, the shove the bottle, and then the frame he asked to see twice the old man's palm releasing the lock, catching the boy's neck, laying him down soft. When the lights came up, nobody spoke for 3 seconds. Voss asked for a recess. She got 10 minutes and took 4. Your Honor, my client moves to withdraw with prejudice. Ellison removed his glasses and looked a long moment at Richard Donovan. Granted, this court imagines the city attorney will enjoy the question of who edited that video. The gavel came down like a clean throw, and then a chair scraped Chase. Donovan was on his feet, pulling the sling over his head. What would the boy who'd built his fame on an old man's humiliation say, now that the whole world finally knew the truth? Chase didn't go to the witness stand. He turned to face the gallery, and the cameras he'd spent years feeding. Everything Mr. Coleman said is true. Everything on that drive is true. His voice broke, and for once he let it. I shoved him because he was a janitor, and I told myself janitors were furniture. He never threw one punch at me. The third time I had a metal bottle I was swinging for his head, and I went down wrong. My arm was aimed at the concrete. He looked at Elijah for the first time. He caught me. The man I was trying to destroy caught my neck so I wouldn't crack my skull. I felt it. The footage shows it. I knew it the whole time, and I let them sell a lie anyway. He faced Elijah last and bowed, clumsy, unpracticed, the first honest bow of his life. I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. I didn't know what day I picked. I do now, and I can't give it back. Elijah studied him a long moment and said nothing at all. Some apologies have to season before they're answered. The consequences arrived like dominoes that had been waiting politely in line. The State Athletic Commission reviewed the unedited footage and stripped Chase's regional standing for conduct. The steel bottle ended the debate. His sponsors were gone by Friday. The supplement brand released a statement with the word values in it 3 times. Richard Donovan fared worse. The city attorney opened an inquiry into the doctored video and his partner's smelling weather, backed out of 2 uptown towers. The Titan Forge Board, suddenly brave, voted Greg Halloran out before lunch on a Tuesday. He packed his framed sponsorship check himself. Nicole Hayes turned down 3 news stations and took a job with a law office instead. 2 weeks later, the board called Elijah Reed into the office that used to ignore him and offered him the head coaching position. Full salary, his name on the wall. He listened with his hands folded. I'll take it, he said. On one condition. Tuesday and Thursday nights, the main mat belongs to the neighborhood. Free classes. Every kid who walks in, no fees, no cuts. The board agreed before he finished. One more thing, he added. It has a name. The Isaiah Reed Program. Nobody in that room argued. On the first night, 31 children sat cross-legged on the main mat, Deshaun front and center. Elijah walked in carrying the steel footlocker and a hammer. He drove a small nail into the wall by the door and hung a photograph facing out where it would watch every class, a tall young man of 20 grinning under a championship banner, forever about to win. Then he opened the box in front of all of them, lifted out the coral belt worn soft and gray, and tied it around his waist with hands that did not shake. 14 years of silence ended in 2 quiet knots. First lesson, he told the kids, his voice carrying to the corners the way it used to. The strongest thing you'll ever learn on this mat is how to walk away from a fight. The second strongest is how to make sure you can. 31 heads nodded like it was scripture. He was halfway through teaching falls when the gym door opened. Chase Donovan stood there in plain gray sweats. No logo, no entourage, no camera. The room went still. The kids knew his face. Everyone in Charlotte knew his face. He crossed to the edge of the mat, stopped at the tape line like a man at a border, and bowed. "Mr. Reed, teach me the right way. I'll start from nothing." Elijah looked at him a long, level moment. Then he pointed at the supply closet. "Grab a mop first," he said. "The floor teaches humility. Lesson 1 starts there." And the boy who had filmed an old man falling walked to the closet, picked up a mop in front of 31 children, and began to push it in long, even arcs that never crossed their own path, because he had asked the old man to show him how. Nobody laughed. The internet would have called it content. The mat called it justice. 6 months later, on a cold Tuesday in December, the lights of Titan Forge burned warm against the dark. Through the front glass, you could see the main mat crowded 60 kids now lines that started crooked in October and stood straight by Christmas. The Isaiah Reed program had a waiting list, then a second location. By spring, it would have 5 in 5 cities, each opened by a phone call Elijah never asked anyone to make. Andre taught Tuesdays. Keisha flew in monthly to teach falling, which she called the most honest skill on earth. Marcus paid every bill and refused every interview. Chase was there every night, easy to miss, which was new for him. He wore plain white, like every beginner, swept the mats before class and mopped them after, and never posted again. A reporter once asked if this was a redemption arc. Chase thought about it. "No," he said. "It's just Tuesdays." Elijah still arrived at 4:45. Some habits are load-bearing, but the photograph by the door faced out now, and he'd started talking to it again. Small things, scores and stances which Kid finally kept her chin down. On the 14th every year, the program held no classes. The mat stayed empty, and the lights stayed on one night for a champion who never got to arrive. Nobody scheduled it. Everybody honored it. Deshaun earned his first stripe in November. When Elijah knelt to tie it on, the boy whispered something only the two of them heard, and the old man laughed a real one from the chest. Later, Nicole asked what the kid had said. Elijah just smiled and kept sweeping a floor he no longer had to sweep. "Some things," he said, "are between a coach and his fighter." For 8 years, a master swept floors in silence, and nobody asked his name. It took 60 seconds of cruelty to make the world curious about a man that 60 seconds of kindness would have revealed. Worth doesn't wear a uniform, and it doesn't wear a skin. Don't wait for the mat to find out who's standing next to you. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments about someone in your life the world treats as invisible, and subscribe because next week there's another one waiting and we tell a new one every Sunday.